If you have been watching the House Judiciary Committee over the past several months, you already know that Jim Jordan runs that room like a man who has never once considered the possibility that things might not go his way. He is loud, he is aggressive, and he has built his entire congressional identity around the idea that he controls the pace and the direction of every proceeding he chairs. He interrupts witnesses. He talks over colleagues. He sets the terms of the debate before anyone else has had a chance to speak, and he maintains that control through sheer force of volume and relentless forward momentum. For years, that approach has worked well enough that it has become his signature, the thing people expect when they see Jim Jordan sitting behind that chairman's gavel. But what happened on the day Jasmine Crockett walked into that hearing room with one brutal fact in her back pocket was something that the playbook Jordan has relied on for his entire career had no answer for. He did not just lose the argument. He lost control of the hearing itself. And the moment it happened, the room, and then the country knew that something had changed. Before we get into the full story, if you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button right now and give this video a like, because we cover the moments from inside Washington that actually matter, the ones that cut through the noise and show you what is really happening when powerful people are forced to account for themselves in public. Now let us get into exactly what happened, how it unfolded, and why this particular moment broke through in a way that almost nothing from a congressional hearing ever does. Jim Jordan has been in Congress long enough to have mastered the specific art of the congressional hearing as a political instrument. He understands, better than most of his colleagues on either side of the aisle, that a hearing is not primarily about discovering truth or building a factual record. It is about controlling a narrative. It is about shaping what the cameras capture, what the clips show, and what the audience at home takes away from the proceedings. He knows how to use the gavel. He knows how to use interruption. He knows how to create the impression of momentum and authority even when the substance underneath his questioning is thin. He has done it enough times that it has become muscle memory, a practiced performance of dominance that he can execute almost without thinking. The Judiciary Committee hearing that day had been framed, in the way that Jordan frames most of his hearings, as an opportunity for Republicans to press a particular narrative about democratic governance, federal overreach, or institutional failure. The specific subject matter was one that Jordan's team had spent time preparing around, pulling together talking points, identifying the moments they intended to create, choreographing the arc of the proceeding so that the outcome the majority wanted was more or less built into the structure of the day before a single question had been asked. This is how it works when you control the gavel. You design the room before you walk into it. What Jordan had not designed for was Jasmine Crockett. She had come prepared in the way she always comes prepared, not with talking points designed to generate applause, not with rhetoric calibrated to play well in a 30-second clip, but with a specific, documented, thoroughly verified fact that sat at the center of everything Jordan had been building his hearing around. A fact that did not require interpretation or context or partisan framing to be understood. A fact that was simply true, fully sourced, and entirely incompatible with the narrative Jordan had spent the morning constructing in that room. She had known about it before she walked through the door. She had verified it. She had thought carefully about exactly when and how to deploy it for maximum effect. And she had waited with the patience of someone who understands that timing is not a secondary consideration in these settings. It is the whole game. The hearing moved through its early stages in the way that Jordan's hearings tend to move, fast, loud, and heavily tilted toward the majority's preferred framing. Jordan controlled the pace with the practiced confidence of a man who has never lost his grip on a room he was chairing. He interrupted Democratic members during their questioning time. He made declarative statements during exchanges that were supposed to be questions. He moved the proceeding along at the speed he chose, in the direction he had predetermined, and the overall impression he was projecting was one of absolute institutional control. His Republican colleagues followed his lead, building on each other's questions in ways that reinforced the narrative Jordan had established at the outset. On the surface, it looked exactly like every other Judiciary Committee hearing that Jordan had run since he became chairman, a tightly managed production designed to produce a specific political result. Underneath the surface, Crockett was watching. She was watching the specific claims Jordan was making. She was watching the way those claims built on each other. She was noting the specific language he used, the specific conclusions he was drawing, and the specific evidentiary foundation he was presenting as the basis for those conclusions. She was not simply sitting through the hearing waiting for her time to speak. She was constructing, in real time, the most precise and most devastating way to use what she had brought into the room that morning. When her time came, she did not open with the fact. That is the detail that matters most in understanding why this moment landed the way it did. She did not lead with her strongest card, because leading with your strongest card in a room like Jordan's gives the other person time to recover, time to reframe, time to pivot toward ground where the damage can be managed. She opened with a question that appeared, on its surface, to be a straightforward clarification, a request for Jordan to confirm a specific element of the argument he had been making throughout the hearing. The question was simple enough that Jordan answered it without hesitation, with the casual confidence of someone who does not yet understand what is being assembled around him. The confirmation he gave was exactly what she needed. Because the thing Jordan had just confirmed, casually and on the record, directly contradicted the brutal fact she was holding, not in a way that required argument or interpretation, in a way that was arithmetically, documentably, and completely straightforwardly wrong. The fact she had brought into that room did not bend. It did not depend on how you framed it or which political lens you applied to it. It was the kind of fact that simply sits there and means what it means regardless of who is looking at it. And what it meant was that the central claim Jim Jordan had been building his entire hearing around was not supported by the record he had claimed it was supported by. She dropped it. The delivery was calm. This is the thing about Crockett in these moments that consistently catches people off guard. The scale of what she is doing never shows up in her tone. She does not announce the significance of what she is about to say. She does not build to it with dramatic emphasis or the kind of theatrical pause that signals to a room that something important is coming. She simply states it, directly, completely, with a specific sourcing that makes it impossible to dismiss as opinion or interpretation, and lets the fact do the work that the fact is capable of doing when it is accurate and documented and placed in exactly the right context at exactly the right moment. The room took a second to process it. That second, that brief, charged pause between the moment the fact landed and the moment the room fully understood what it meant, was the most significant second of the entire hearing. Because what was happening in that second was the collapse of the structure Jordan had spent the morning building. Every claim he had made that rested on the foundation she had just removed was now floating without support. Every conclusion his Republican colleagues had been drawing from that foundation was now disconnected from the evidence that was supposed to justify it. The narrative Jordan had designed the hearing to produce had just encountered a documented fact that the narrative could not survive, and everyone in the room was in the process of understanding that simultaneously. Jordan understood it faster than most, and that is when he lost control. His first response was an interruption, a reflexive deployment of the tool he reaches for most instinctively when a hearing is moving in a direction he has not chosen. He spoke over Crockett before she had finished the sentence following the fact, his voice carrying the particular aggressive energy of a man who is not trying to add something to the conversation, but to stop it from continuing. It was not a question. It was not a rebuttal. It was an attempt to break the momentum of what she had just done before the room had fully absorbed it. Crockett did not stop. She continued speaking with the same even, measured tone she had been using before the interruption, which had the effect of making Jordan's interjection visible as an interjection. Not a contribution to the exchange, but an attempt to derail it. The contrast between her composure and his volume said something that neither of them needed to put into words. She was in command of what she was doing. He was reacting to it. And in a room full of people trained to read the dynamics of power, that distinction was impossible to miss. Jordan interrupted again, this time more forcefully, invoking his authority as chairman to suggest that Crockett was out of order, that her line of questioning was beyond the scope of the hearing, that the proceeding needed to return to the subject matter he had established at the outset. These are the standard tools of a chairman who is losing the room, the procedural levers that exist to restore order, but that, when deployed in moments like this one, communicate something about why order needs to be restored. The room understood what the procedural challenge was really about. Jordan's Republican colleagues, who had been confidently building on his narrative all morning, had gone noticeably quiet. The witnesses before the committee were watching the exchange with the careful attention of people who have just watched the ground shift beneath a proceeding they thought they understood. Crockett addressed the procedural challenge with the same composure she had brought to everything else. She noted, specifically and correctly, that her question was directly relevant to the subject matter Jordan himself had established as the focus of the hearing. That, in fact, the brutal fact she had introduced was not tangential to Jordan's narrative but central to it, because it was the documented reality against which that narrative had to be measured. She was not out of order. She was doing exactly what the hearing was supposed to enable members to do. And the parliamentary record of the morning's proceedings supported her position completely, because Jordan had spent hours making arguments that now had to be reconciled with what she had just placed on the record. Jordan pushed back again. His voice had taken on a quality that it rarely carries in public settings, a slightly elevated, slightly strained register that communicates pressure being managed with difficulty. He is not someone who shows strain easily. He has been in high-pressure public settings for long enough that the performance of calm authority has become second nature. But there is a specific kind of pressure that produces a crack in even the most practiced composure, the pressure of being publicly wrong about something specific, on the record, in front of cameras, with no available path to an explanation that holds up. That is the pressure Jordan was under in this moment, and it was showing. Members on the Democratic side of the committee, who had spent the morning absorbing the aggressive pace Jordan had set, began to find their voice. The shift in the room's energy created space that had not existed an hour earlier, space for questions that Jordan's dominance of the early proceedings had foreclosed, space for challenges to the narrative that the hearing had been designed to prevent from being made effectively. One by one, Democratic members began building on what Crockett had introduced, using the documented fact she had dropped as a foundation for their own lines of questioning. The hearing that Jordan had choreographed as a controlled production was becoming something genuinely unpredictable, and the thing that had made it unpredictable was sitting in the record, verified and immovable, exactly where Crockett had placed it. Jordan attempted to regain control through volume, through procedure, through the repeated assertion of his authority as chairman. Each attempt was less effective than the one before it, because each attempt drew additional attention to the fact that control needed to be regained. And the reason it needed to be regained was the documented truth that a member of his committee had introduced, and that the proceeding could no longer pretend was not there. You cannot unsay a documented fact once it is on the record. You cannot procedurally rule it out of existence. You can interrupt the person who stated it. You can try to move the hearing past the moment it was introduced. You can deploy every tool available to a committee chairman to restore the atmosphere of control. But the fact remains, and everyone in the room knows it remains. The witnesses before the committee, individuals who had arrived that morning, prepared to navigate the particular dynamics of a Jordan-run hearing, who had expected the aggressive questioning style, and the controlled narrative and the carefully managed pace, were watching something they had not prepared for. They were watching a chairman who had lost the thread of his own proceeding, who was visibly working harder than he had expected to work to maintain a grip on a room that was no longer entirely his. Their responses in the aftermath of Crockett's intervention had a different quality than their earlier testimony, more careful, more precise, more aware that the evidentiary ground of the hearing had shifted in a way that changed what could safely be claimed. The clip captured everything. The stillness of the room in the second after the fact landed, Jordan's interruptions, Crockett's unbroken composure through each of them. The visible strain in Jordan's voice as he worked to reassert authority that the moment had undermined. The quiet among his Republican colleagues who had been confidently following his lead all morning. The gradual reanimation of the Democratic side of the committee as the space created by Crockett's intervention expanded. All of it was on camera, and all of it was immediately legible to anyone who watched it, regardless of their political background or their familiarity with the specific subject matter the hearing had been called to address. Within minutes of the clip reaching social media, it was moving at the speed that only the most recognizable and most viscerally clear moments achieve. People who had never watched a Judiciary Committee hearing in their lives were watching this one, or the 90 seconds of it that showed a chairman losing control of his own room in real time because a member of his committee had dropped a fact he could not answer. The comments filled with the specific kind of reaction that comes not from partisan alignment, but from the universal experience of watching someone be publicly cornered by the truth. There is something deeply and broadly recognizable in that experience. It transcends politics. It transcends party. It connects to something that everyone who has ever watched a confident person insist on something that turns out to be wrong can immediately identify. Jordan's team moved quickly in the aftermath, producing statements about the hearing's overall outcomes, emphasizing the elements of the morning's proceedings that had gone according to plan, and framing the exchange with Crockett as a distraction from the substantive work the committee had been doing. Those statements ran directly into the clip, which was by that point circulating on every major platform and had been viewed by an audience that was orders of magnitude larger than the room in which the original moment had occurred. The statements asked people to interpret the exchange in one way. The clip showed them what had actually happened. And in the current media environment, the clip wins that contest almost every time. Conservative commentators who cover the Judiciary Committee regularly found themselves in the uncomfortable but unavoidable position of acknowledging that the specific exchange had not gone well for Jordan. Some attempted the argument that the broader narrative of the hearing had remained intact despite the specific evidentiary problem Crockett had introduced. Others focused on procedural questions about whether her intervention had been appropriately within the scope of the proceeding. But the most honest assessments, even from Jordan's ideological allies, conceded the essential point. A member of his committee had introduced a documented fact that his position could not accommodate, and his response to that fact had been more about trying to stop it from being heard than about actually engaging with it. That is not a response that projects strength, regardless of how loudly it is delivered. For Crockett, the moment was consistent with a pattern of congressional engagement that has defined her presence in the House in ways that are increasingly difficult to ignore. She does not select her moments randomly. She does not walk into high-profile settings relying on instinct or improvisation. She identifies specific vulnerabilities in specific arguments made by specific people in specific settings, and she prepares her interventions with a level of precision and patience that consistently catches her opponents in a position they have not anticipated. She had known what Jordan's hearing was going to argue before the hearing began. She had found the fact that his argument could not survive. She had waited for the moment in the proceeding when deploying that fact would produce the most complete and most visible result. And she had executed with the composure of someone for whom the outcome, while not guaranteed, had been made as likely as preparation can make anything. Jim Jordan has run hundreds of congressional hearings. He has dominated rooms, shaped narratives, and produced political moments that have served his agenda with considerable effectiveness. He is genuinely skilled at what he does, and underestimating him as a political operator would be a mistake. But skill at controlling a room has a specific and important limitation. It works until it encounters something that cannot be controlled. Documented facts, precisely deployed by someone who has done the preparation to know exactly where and when they will be most effective, cannot be interrupted into silence or gavelled out of existence. They sit in the record. They are on camera. They are in the room and in the world simultaneously the moment they are spoken. Crockett knew that. She had known it before she walked through the door. She had built her entire intervention around it. And when the moment arrived, when she dropped the one brutal fact that Jordan's entire hearing could not accommodate, she did not do it dramatically, did not do it with fanfare or performance, or the kind of theatrical emphasis that would have given Jordan something to respond to that was not the fact itself. She simply stated it clearly and calmly, and let the truth do what truth does in a room full of people who have been paying close enough attention to recognize it when they hear it. The hearing collapsed around it. Not metaphorically, in the specific, visible, documented way that a proceeding collapses when the evidentiary foundation it has been built upon is shown, on the record, to be insufficient. Jim Jordan lost control of his own hearing because a member of his committee walked in with something he could not manage, delivered it at the moment it would be most effective, and held her position through every attempt he made to regain the ground he had lost. The room went quiet in the wrong places and loud in the wrong ways, and all of it was on camera, and all of it went everywhere, because what people had watched was not a political debate. It was a reckoning. And reckonings, when they happen clearly and visibly in public settings, have a way of being remembered long after the specific policy arguments that surrounded them have faded from the news cycle. That is accountability operating at its most fundamental level. Not performed, not choreographed, not designed to produce a clip for a fundraising email. Just a prepared person, a documented fact, and the moment she chose to introduce it into a room that was not ready for it. If you stayed with this story all the way to the end, do two things right now: hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. We are going to keep bringing you the moments from inside Washington that reveal something true about power, preparation, and what happens when the two meet in a room with cameras running. The next story is already on its way, and you do not want to miss it.